Imagine standing in the frozen ruins of a city that once pulsed with life, where the wind howls through shattered buildings and the ground is littered with the remnants of dreams turned to dust. It's January 1943, and in the heart of Stalingrad, a man faces a choice that will echo through history. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, the architect of one of the most brutal battles the world has ever seen, raises a white flag, not out of cowardice, but out of a desperate bid for humanity amid unimaginable suffering. What if I told you that this moment didn't just end a battle? It began a personal odyssey that would span captivity, conversion, and quiet exile, culminating in a Dresden villa where the shadows of two regimes lingered long after his death? Today, we're diving into the life of Friedrich Paulus, a story of war, regret, and the search for truth in a divided world. It's a tale that reminds us how one decision can reshape not only a man's fate, but the narrative of an entire era. Let's step back to understand the man behind the myth. Friedrich Paulus was born in 1890 into a modest family, far from the grandeur of military aristocracy. He rose through the ranks of the German army with a reputation for meticulous planning and unyielding discipline, a staff officer who thrived on strategy rather than the chaos of the front lines. By the time World War II erupted, he had become a key figure in the Wehrmacht, helping to orchestrate the swift invasions of Poland and France. But it was Operation Barbarossa, the massive assault on the Soviet Union in 1941, that thrust him into the spotlight. Paulus took command of the Sixth Army, a force of over 300,000 men, tasked with capturing the industrial heart of the East. Stalingrad, named after the Soviet leader himself, was the prize, a symbol of defiance that Hitler demanded be taken at any cost. Picture this scene as summer faded into autumn in 1942. The Sixth Army pushed forward with tanks rumbling across the steppes, artillery thundering like distant storms. Paulus, ever the tactician, believed in calculated advances, but the reality on the ground was far messier. The city became a meat grinder, with soldiers fighting room by room, street by street, in a labyrinth of rubble and fire. Snipers lurked in the shadows, and every building was a fortress. As supplies dwindled and the Soviet counteroffensive encircled his forces in November, the noose tightened. Hitler, from his distant bunker, issued orders to hold firm, promising airlifts that never fully materialized. The winter descended like a cruel executioner, temperatures plunging to minus 30 degrees Celsius, frostbite claiming limbs, starvation hollowing out faces. Paulus's men, once a proud army, were reduced to scavenging for food, boiling shoe leather, or worse. Rhetorically, what would you do in his shoes? Obey a madman's decree and lead your troops to certain death, or defy it and face the label of traitor? On January 30th, 1943, Hitler promoted Paulus to field marshal, a not-so-subtle hint drawing from history. No German field marshal had ever surrendered alive. The implication was clear: fight to the last man or take your own life. But Paulus, gaunt and weary after months of siege, chose differently. The next day, he surrendered to the Red Army, becoming the highest-ranking German officer captured alive. Over 91,000 of his men followed into captivity, though tragically, only about 6,000 would ever return home, as reported by historical accounts from sources like the BBC. To Berlin, this was betrayal. To the world watching, it was a crack in the Nazi facade, a human acknowledgement that the war machine had broken. The Soviets saw opportunity in their prize. Paulus wasn't thrown into a gulag like common prisoners. Instead, he was transported to a secure compound near Moscow, treated with a calculated respect. Fed, housed comfortably, but isolated and interrogated. At first he resisted, refusing to denounce his former leaders or collaborate. He spent his days sketching maps from memory, reflecting on the tactical errors that had doomed Stalingrad. But isolation has a way of eroding resolve, doesn't it? News of Hitler's fury, branding him a disgrace, struck deep. Over time, through patient persuasion, books, discussions with Soviet officers, and encounters with anti-Nazi Germans, Paulus's views shifted. By 1944, after the failed plot to assassinate Hitler, he joined the National Committee for a Free Germany, a Soviet-backed group urging German soldiers to lay down arms. His broadcasts and statements criticized the Nazi regime, calling for peace. This transformation wasn't without cost. Back in Germany, his family suffered under the Nazi policy of Sippenhaft, collective punishment, with his wife and daughter arrested. Yet Paulus pressed on, his voice now aligned against the very system he had served. By 1946, he appeared at the Nuremberg trials as a prosecution witness, his testimony methodical and damning. Dressed in a civilian suit, he detailed Hitler's interference in military decisions and dismissed promises of resupply as illusions. To the Allies, it was invaluable evidence. To his former comrades, it was unforgivable. As he swore to tell the pure truth, adding nothing and withholding nothing, the courtroom hung on his words. Was this genuine remorse or survival instinct? History leaves room for both interpretations, but his calm delivery spoke of a man who had stared into the abyss and emerged changed. Even after Nuremberg, freedom eluded him. The Soviets kept Paulus in comfortable but guarded confinement, relocating him to residences outside Moscow. He wrote letters under supervision, analyzed military strategies for his captors, and pondered the war's moral wreckage. His family remained out of reach in West Germany, adding layers of personal anguish. It wasn't until Stalin's death in 1953 that the political winds shifted. As part of a thaw in relations, Paulus was repatriated, not to the West, but to the German Democratic Republic, East Germany. This was no accident. The Soviets saw him as a symbol of redemption, a former Nazi general who had embraced socialism. Settled in Dresden, a city still bearing the scars of Allied firebombing, he was given a villa overlooking the Elbe River, a gesture of respect, or perhaps a subtle form of control. In Dresden, Paulus lived quietly, serving as the civilian head of the East German Military History Research Institute from 1953 to 1956. He lectured on the follies of fascism, warning against the destructive paths of past regimes. In a 1954 speech in East Berlin, he critiqued the leadership of both the German Empire and Nazi Germany, called for reconciliation with former enemies, and expressed hope for German reunification, a poignant plea in a divided nation. Neighbors might have seen him walking along the riverbank, his posture still military straight, but his steps slower with age. Yet, as declassified Stasi files later revealed, he was under constant surveillance, his phone tapped, visitors logged. In the secretive world of East Germany, even a rehabilitated figure like Paulus couldn't escape the watchful eye of the state. As the years passed, health issues crept in. Diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis in late 1956, Paulus grew progressively weaker, his body betraying the discipline that had defined him. He died on February 1, 1957, at age 66, in his Dresden home. The East German government issued a subdued announcement, praising his commitment to peace. His body, per his wishes, was sent to West Germany for burial beside his wife in Baden-Baden. But what lingered after his passing? Not just a villa, but questions about the man who had navigated the treacherous waters between loyalty and conscience. In the next part, we'll explore the echoes of his life in that Dresden home and the legacy that continues to intrigue historians today. Imagine the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across a study lined with bookshelves, where the faint scent of aged paper mingles with the chill of a Dresden evening. It's 1953, and Friedrich Paulus steps through the iron gates of his new home on Proststrasse 10, a grand villa perched on the hills overlooking the Elbe River. The city below still whispers of its wartime wounds, charred facades half rebuilt, streets where the ghosts of 1945's firestorm seem to linger in the cobblestones. To you and me, listening from afar, this might sound like a peaceful retirement for a war-weary man. But pull back the curtain, and you'll find a life woven with invisible threads of surveillance, unspoken regrets, and secrets tucked away like forgotten letters in a drawer. Welcome to part 2 of our journey into the untold truth of Friedrich Paulus's final years, a story that transforms a quiet villa into a stage for the Cold War's silent dramas. Picture Paulus arriving in East Germany, not as a free man, but as a carefully curated symbol. After a decade in Soviet captivity, His release was no simple act of mercy. Stalin's death had cracked open the door to goodwill gestures, and Paulus, the once mighty field marshal, was repatriated to the German Democratic Republic as living proof that even Nazi leaders could be redeemed through socialism. Historical records from the German Historical Institute confirm this. He was housed in a villa that had once belonged to a prominent Dresden family, seized by the Soviets after the war and now repurposed. To the public, it was an honor, a spacious home with manicured gardens and river views. But insiders knew better. The Ministry for State Security, the Stasi, dubbed it Object Terrace, a code name straight out of their playbook for high-value surveillance targets. Every phone call tapped, every visitor logged, even the gardener an informant. As declassified Stasi archives later revealed, documents accessible today through the Federal Archives in Berlin, agents patrolled the perimeter in plain clothes, microphones hidden in lamps and furniture, capturing whispers that might betray the state's narrative. Yet amid this invisible cage, Paulus carved out a rhythm of quiet defiance. He rose at dawn, as soldiers do, his days structured like a well-ordered campaign. Mornings were for reading, stacks of military histories, maps of Europe unfurled across his desk, books on strategy from Clausewitz to Soviet tacticians. Afternoons, he'd walk the Elbe embankment, his tall frame still ramrod straight despite the years, nodding to passers-by who stared but rarely spoke. Neighbors recalled him in interviews with German broadcaster ARD, a solitary figure, coat buttoned against the wind, eyes fixed on the flowing river as if searching for answers in its currents. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world, one elderly resident shared, but he never complained. Inside the villa, a personal cook prepared simple meals, potato soup, rye bread, while a housekeeper dusted shelves adorned with odd Soviet gifts, a ceremonial saber from a Red Army general, a framed portrait of Stalin that Paulus kept face down, and a small diorama of Stalingrad's ruins, sent anonymously as a reminder or perhaps a taunt. His official role added another layer to this gilded exile. From 1953 to 1956, Paulus served as the civilian head of the East German Military History Research Institute, lecturing to officers and students on the perils of fascism. In a 1954 speech in East Berlin, documented in the pages of Neue Deutschland, the state newspaper, he didn't mince words. The leadership of the German Empire and the Nazi regime led our people into catastrophe, he declared, his voice steady, calling for reconciliation with former enemies and a united Germany free from division. Attendees described it to historians as electric, a former field marshal critiquing the very system he'd served, now aligned with socialist ideals. But was it heartfelt or scripted? Rhetorical question for you. Could a man who'd commanded 300,000 souls at Stalingrad ever fully shed the skin of his past? Paulus gave tightly supervised interviews, always under Stasi eyes, warning against militarism's destructive path. To young East German cadets, he was a cautionary tale made flesh. To Western observers peeking through the Iron Curtain, a puzzle. Had the Soviets truly converted him? Or was he playing the long game for survival? Behind those tall windows overlooking the Elbe, though, the real story unfolded in solitude. Paulus's study on the upper floor became his sanctuary, a room bathed in afternoon light where he penned letters that rarely left the villa. Correspondence with his family in West Germany was filtered, words chosen like moves on a chessboard. "I think of you every day," he'd write to his wife, Romatine, but pleas for reunion were redacted. He analyzed battles for the Institute, his handwriting precise as ever, marginal notes revealing flashes of doubt. Hitler's interference was not strategy, but madness. And then there were the private reflections, journals, drafts of speeches never delivered, one boldly denouncing both Hitler and Stalin as tyrants who'd crushed the human spirit. Whispers among East German officers, later echoed in historian Jeffrey Roberts's book The Unfinished 20th Century, suggested Paulus guarded wartime records closely. Sketches of Stalingrad's defenses, lists of surrendered officers, even coded notes from Soviet interrogations. Did he keep them as mementos, or as ammunition for a truth he couldn't yet speak? Life in the villa wasn't without warmth, though. Occasional visits from East German army officers brought uneasy respect, shared tea, discussions of tactics, a nod to shared history. A few trusted friends slipped through the gates. An old comrade from the Weimar era, a Soviet colonel who'd treated him kindly in captivity. But suspicion shadowed everything. Stasi logs, unsealed in the 1990s and reported by the BBC, detail object terrace is secure, a dry entry masking round-the-clock watches. One report notes a late-night conversation where Paulus murmured about unfinished business, enough to trigger a file review. As health faltered, diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis in 1956, the same disease that would claim physicist Stephen Hawking decades later, Paulus withdrew further. His hands trembled over paper, legs weakened on walks, but his mind remained sharp. Late evenings, lights off, he'd sit by the window, the city's lights twinkling like distant stars, lost in thought. What ghosts visited him then? The frozen faces of Stalingrad's fallen? The Nuremberg courtroom's accusing stares? Or the what-ifs of a life unmarred by war? February 1st, 1957, dawned cold and gray. Paulus, just 66, slipped away peacefully in his bed, the villa silent save for the housekeeper's soft sobs. The East German government issued a terse statement in Neues Deutschland. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, a committed fighter for peace, has passed. No fanfare, no crowds, just a modest funeral under Soviet supervision, his coffin draped in a simple cloth. Per his wishes, the body was transported to West Germany for burial beside Romatine in Baden-Baden, a final crossing of the divide. Dresden exhaled, or so it seemed. But as officials sealed the villa's doors that very day, the real drama was just beginning. Stasi teams arrived under cover of routine inventory, their orders vague yet urgent. Catalog belongings, secure the property, recover anything of ideological value. What they uncovered in the weeks that followed would send ripples through intelligence circles, fragments of a life too dangerous to surface. In Part 3, we'll step inside that hidden room, unravel the shocking discoveries, and confront the silence that still guards Paulus's deepest truths, leaving you to wonder. What secrets were so explosive they vanished into the Cold War's shadows? Imagine the creak of a heavy oak door, yielding after decades of silence, its hinges protesting like a reluctant confession. It's late spring 1957, and a team of Stasi officers, faces stern beneath peaked caps, steps into the dim confines of Friedrich Paulus's Dresden villa on Prostrasse 10. The air hangs thick with dust motes, dancing in faint shafts of light, carrying the musty scent of forgotten ink and yellowed paper. Outside, the Elbe flows indifferently onward, but inside these walls, once a gilded cage for a field marshal haunted by two worlds, the officers aren't here for sentiment. They're hunting secrets. And what they uncover in a hidden room will ignite whispers that echo from East Berlin to Moscow, leaving historians, even today, grasping at shadows. Welcome to Part 3, the gripping finale of our journey into the untold truth behind Friedrich Paulus's mansion. A revelation so profound it was buried for decades, challenging everything we thought we knew about the man, the war, and the Cold War's merciless grip on memory. Let's set the scene with the precision Paulus himself might have admired. Days after his quiet death on February 1st, the East German government published a brief obituary in Neues Deutschland, the state newspaper. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, a steadfast advocate for peace and against fascism, has passed away at 66. No mention of Stalingrad's frozen hell, no nod to Nuremberg's damning testimony, just a sanitized salute to a rehabilitated soul. The villa's iron gates clanged shut, seals affixed by ministry officials. For weeks, it stood empty, a tomb for both man and mystery. Then, in April, under orders from the highest echelons, rumored to trace back to Soviet advisors in Berlin, a select Stasi unit arrived. Their mandate, as pieced together from declassified fragments in the Federal Archives of Germany, was straightforward on paper. Inventory personal effects, prepare the property for reassignment. But the subtext screamed louder. Scour every corner for materials of political or ideological sensitivity. In the Stasi's world, that phrase was code for dynamite. anything that could embarrass the regime, contradict Soviet narratives, or expose cracks in the Iron Curtain. The search began methodically, room by room, gloved hands rifling drawers and shelves. The ground floor yielded little drama: a modest kitchen with half-eaten bread on the counter, a living room sparsely furnished with Soviet-issue armchairs, a ceremonial saber propped in the corner like a silent sentinel. Upstairs, the study, Paulus's inner sanctum, held the real trove. Bookshelves groaned under volumes of military history. Clausewitz's On War, dog-eared at passages on encirclement, Soviet analyses of Barbarossa, marked with Paulus's precise underlinings. Maps of Stalingrad unfurled like ghosts, red arrows tracing the Sixth Army's fatal noose. Letters to his wife Romatine, filtered and faded, spoke of longing. The river reminds me of home, but the walls close in. A housekeeper's diary noted his final days. Trembling hands from ALS, murmurs of unfinished accounts in the night. Nothing explosive yet. But then, as one officer shifted a towering bookshelf against the far wall, a faint click echoed. A sliding panel revealed a narrow door, its keyhole sealed with wax, untouched for years. Hearts pounding, they pried it open. What lay beyond would stun even these hardened agents. Step inside with me, if you dare. The hidden room was no larger than a closet, 9 feet by 6, lit only by their flashlights. The air was stale, untouched, as if time itself had paused. Stacked wooden crates labeled in Paulus's meticulous script. Sealed envelopes bulging with papers. Bundles of handwritten notes tied with string. And at the center, a locked steel box bearing faded Soviet insignia. According to a redacted Stasi inventory that surfaced in 1991, reported by the BBC in their documentary, Stasi, Secrets of the Eastern Bloc, the haul filled 3 crates weighing over 50 kilograms. Maps from 1942, annotated with tactical critiques, Hitler's halt order at Moscow, pure delusion. Lists of 91,000 Stalingrad prisoners, cross-referenced with survival rates, exposing Soviet gulag horrors omitted from official histories. Draft speeches, one scorching, Hitler and Stalin, twin tyrants who ground men into dust for their egos. Letters to Soviet generals, Zhukov among them, thanking them for honorable treatment, yet questioning Stalin's purges. And the crown jewel, a partial memoir, 200 pages unfinished, titled Reflections from the Ruins. In it, Paulus dissected his conversion, not as genuine epiphany, but calculated survival laced with doubt. I spoke at Nuremberg what they wished, he wrote, but my soul remains German, burdened by both flags. Rhetorically, can you feel the chill? One envelope, marked, "Not for eyes until after my death," contained coded correspondence with captured Wehrmacht officers, detailing interrogation brutalities on both sides. Soviet tortures mirroring Gestapo methods. Another held photographs. Paulus, with Red Army interrogators in 1943. Faces blurred. A rare snapshot of his family, smuggled from the West. Historians like Professor Sönke Neitzel, in his book Soldaten, drawing from Allied intercepts, suggest these files contradicted Moscow's sanitized Stalingrad victory tale, admitting Red Army overextensions and civilian massacres. One Stasi report, leaked to Der Spiegel in 2005, quoted an officer, "The field marshal's papers, a political landmine, material withheld for Moscow evaluation." The shock wasn't just the volume, it was the duality. Here was a man the Soviets paraded as their triumph, yet his private words indicted them as deeply as the Nazis. Whispers flew, had Paulus played both sides? Was this his final act of defiance, archiving truth for posterity? The response was swift and surgical. By May, unmarked vans arrived at dusk, guards posted to deter prying eyes. Neighbors, interviewed decades later by ARD, recalled the commotion. Boxes carried out under tarps, engines rumbling into the night. The documents vanished into Berlin's Stasi vaults, classified under exceptional state relevance. Officers involved were reassigned, some to remote postings, one rumored silenced permanently. The villa? Scrubbed, rewired, sold to loyal party members by 1958.